And so I will get started. I don't want to keep everyone over. And I know that Richard has been generous enough to give us 20 more minutes with him. And I want to take advantage of that because I think that this is, such a valuable and powerful opportunity to share your journey, to talk about your craft. And so I am going to briefly, and I don't know how many were able to join us for the morning session, but I would like to share, and like I said before, that I've known Richard from a very, very early on, a lot of long years ago, a long time ago. It feels like another lifetime. It really does, which is really bizarre. But and fell in love with his words even then. And I'm so happy that he was able to join us. And so, it always makes my heart smile when I see the success that that you have earned and what you've been able to do and how you contribute and give back. So thank you so much, Richard, for being with us. I just want to say that Richard Blanco, of course, captivates audiences around the nation and the world with his dynamic storytelling, the powerful craft, his connection to family and a sense of belonging, a sense of place. He was selected by Barack Obama as the 5th presidential inaugural poet in U.S. history. It's funny because when I was writing this, Richard, I hope you know that I was pulling and I was writing that you were the first Latinx and the first immigrant, the first gay person, the youngest poet, and then I had to switch to Amanda Gordon. But second youngest, and I think paved the way to that for that space, built that space also, and has built that space for so many immigrant poets as well and writers. In the words of Obama himself, because I could never, of course, do justice to this, President Obama said, Blanco's contributions to the fields of poetry and the arts have already paved the path forward for future generations of writers. He has authored 4 poetry collections and 2 memoirs, I believe, and his latest book of poems, so that's a lot, very prolific and also has been anthologized in so many texts, even in introductory material to like SLS, the freshman experience. So thank you so much for that. And his latest book is How to Love a Country, and it both interrogates the American narrative, past and present, and celebrates the still unkept promise of its ideals. And you can have your own copy of How to Love a Country. It is electronic version because of the pandemic, and I apologize for that, but you can have it by visiting the TNL Symposium, and I will put that link in the chat. And without further ado, Richard, it's all yours. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you, Bacchus. Yeah, I was the youngest, but I've actually had conversations with Amanda. She is really just a wonderful dynamo. She knows Spanish too, which is great. So we text in Spanish so she can practice. Anyway, glad to be with all of you here. Again, this is very informal. I have some notes. I had some ideas of what to do, but I'm guessing most of us are now faculty here. So I guess I wanted to share some perspectives that help the faculty and whatever students may be around. But I guess one of the most important things I sort of want to think about is I think, this whole me being a poet engineer and how all that relates, and the idea of the humanities and writing and the worth of those, and I think things that we often as professors have to contend with. I started writing. I started discovering writing actually as a full-time engineer, because my job was, over half of my job was writing letters, proposals, and studies, and excelling in my work because of my writing, but also, well, my job depended on it. And I sort of just started geeking out on language, but also just realizing how important language was. You write a proposal and you get a $40 million job into the firm. Guess who's getting promoted? But anyway, this is when I met Belkis. I was just like, well, what else can I do with this language thing? What do I know nothing about? And I thought, let's write poetry. So I started writing poetry, and over the years, I've kind of realized how important the not just writing, but the humanities in general, or to even to a job as even to a career as an engineer. The idea that the humanities for us teaches us, if anything, one important thing is empathy. And by that, that's a weird word, but empathy meaning just the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes in some ways, which a calculus class does not do. But when you design something, you design a park or a road, you have to envision yourself being in that park, being in that road, being your client, right? And all that sort of to me all came together. And ever since then, I've sort of professed. I teach a class on two engineers here in Boston on the value of humanities and all the rest, history and all the stuff that you need for your job as an engineer. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I think in general the humanities suffer from sort of a bad rap because people feel that the humanities are just for cocktail party conversation, when in reality there's such a practical, necessary value to it in any career that you choose. And I sort of the poster child for that in some ways. And then as far as the other topic, and then I may just open up for questions because I think that's probably the most useful, the best use of our time, what questions you may have. But one of the other topics that I was sort of asked to speak to was about writing and putting your work out there and et cetera, that kind of stuff, more geared towards the students, but I'm sure many of you get these same questions, so I'll just offer you my perspective on that. I guess because I started writing at 27, I think I have a little bit more of a I didn't go through the same thing. I wasn't writing at 12 or anything like that. But I would just say that for students at this age, at a younger age, the most important thing is just to keep on writing. I mean, write, and pray that you are writing your worst poems ever right now. By that I mean that you're going to improve. You're going to improve by leaps and bounds. Just keep on writing. How do we keep on writing? You sign up for workshops, like I did with Professor Castillo. You go to poetry readings. You build community. Find people that you can share your work with, that you can get feedback with. Right now, I think our students' jobs are the most important job or task is to just get their work launched, like get their craft as honed as possible. And I can't emphasize that enough. Sometimes even in grade schools, they'll ask me like, "What advice do you give to a young writer?" I'm like, in 8th grade, like, write. Like, don't worry, just write. Like, so that being said, though, I think what you're looking at is not besides writing is the motivation to keep on writing, right? So like I said, community, these kinds of things. I know my experience in Miami-Dade, Belkis and I were just talking about it, made me feel like a writer and made me want to write more because I was hanging out with poets and having great conversations. So I would say focus on that. Focus on that. There's a lot of emphasis on being published and thinking about writing as a career. Let me just break it down, especially with poetry, but it's not a career, and we got to be very careful of that. It's a vocation that can lead to a career, and certainly, but a vocation means that you're going to show up every day. Doesn't matter whether you win the Pulitzer Prize or not. So just that kind of, there's a, I know it's cool to get published. Hey, I've been there. And we should certainly try and put your work out there and send to magazines. It's part of educating yourself too. Just keep on. Where do I send poems to? Where do I find out about contests and all stuff? But know that that's not the end all and be all of everything, right? What keeps this writer in his seat, right where you see me right now, what keeps my butt in this seat day after day writing is not getting published. It is the art itself. It is that hour that goes by, or 5 hours that seems like 1 hour, where you're engaged with the world and life through this art, and that's the only thing that really keeps you going at the end of the day. I mean, meeting Beyonce, yeah. So just keep that in mind because that's really the long game, right? But like I said, yeah, try to get published. You're gonna get rejected 98% of the time, just like I was, just like I still do. Writing is again not a career. It's not something. Well, nothing is. I mean, when I think about people think like engineer, you study engineering and then that's it, you become an engineer. Engineers don't know what they're doing. We have to figure it out every single project too, right? We keep on learning too. It's not like you get a degree or you get a job and that's it. And I think writing's the same thing. I'm still learning about craft, still thinking about how to make a better poem, write a better poem. How am I challenging myself? I still face the blank page and go like, holy moly, So yeah, I just wanted to sort of offer that. It's great to get published. You should try to get published, showcase your work. But at the end of the day, it's really about the art, and it's about showing up, and all the rest is icing on the cake, so to speak. Um, so anyway, questions maybe? I don't know. Belkis, how do we handle this?
That's fine. Yeah, let's open it up. Actually, I wanted to share some things that I love. I'm gonna start with me. This is what I could do as a moderator. No, I love the idea of designing for empathy, and I love the idea of what it means, right? To be a teacher, to be in that calculus class, and think about, oh my God, how do I design this class for empathy? Like, where do I say the things that I need to say, or show the connections that I need to show, make those relevant, applicable connections so that I could be designing for empathy. Love that. Thank you so much for that. And I do want to, Alex had something in here. Alex, I don't know if you want to share some of the things that you were thinking about, but I love this last comment, and I'm going to go backwards if you guys don't mind, and I hope I don't miss everyone. But Alex was saying that he loves the idea of writing as communal, but that kind of goes against the traditional paradigm, right? The traditional view of writing, because we usually think of writing as a solitary act. And so he doesn't have a question here. He just talks about building community. But what have you found in terms of how to be a writer and still, engage in that, blank staring of the page, but reconcile also and become part of the community?
Yeah, I think the two things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, right? They are. You have to write alone, right? It can be a very solitary endeavor, but it can also you got to know when to break out of that, and it can like get very myopic, and you get lost in the mire of your own work. So how I use community. I mean, even my own partner. Like I sometimes stuck on a poem, and I just print out what I got and read it and talk it over with him. And over the years, he's learned a little bit of the poetry lingo. Even that to me is community. And something happens and it snaps. So yeah, there's times you got to be alone with the page or the screen. But I still have friends from graduate school that read my work. It's just part of the territory. Well, that's one thing, right? It's to improve your craft. But the other thing about community is that it gets harder as you get older, and because we're not in school and whatnot, but also just the idea, like I said, like motivating and feeling like you're part of something is a way of empowering you. It empowers you to feel like you're around like-minded people. You exchange ideas, and that is contributes to your craft too. You by sharing work, by sharing your frustrations. And also just having a beer, like anything, right? If you're an engineer, you sort of cultivate a group of engineers, right, to kvetch or whatnot. So yeah, I seriously believe in that. I still, like I said, I still have my friends from graduate school. We still get together and not always talk about poetry, but certainly we always. In fact, the anthology, I just did an anthology, edited anthology called Grabbed. Grabbed. It's on sexual assault, and it's with lifelong friends. Nikki Mustaki, Caridad Moro, who was, I think, in your poetry crawl, and Elisa Albo, who's also an FIU MFA graduate. So there you go. But yeah, ditto, Alex. I'm glad you caught that, and it's true. At times, students can feel like, oh, writing is just this, quiet thing, and yeah, that's part of it. But you know, even performing your work is also important too, right? Getting your work, not just publishing, but making your work, putting your work in the air, making it come alive. Poetry in particular, has that flavor of the communal, right? It was oral tradition for thousands of years before it was even on the page, and it is kind of that proverbial campfire, or that that we can gather around. It's that kind of the village voice idea. That's where poetry was born out of, and I think that's still a big part of it that we forget sometimes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Actually, Zoraida Pastor, Professor Pastor was asking, why is it that writing is seen as a solitary act? And I think you spoke to that in the sense that really it's kind of is it, right? It came out of this tradition of this communal space. And I think there's a lot of writers that are doing, a kind of negotiating that, right? It's are doing partnerships and doing co-writing, co-authoring, sending each other pieces. I know that Carolina, our own Carolina Hospital, was also writing with her daughter, right? And thinking about. So have you had partnerships like that where you have kind of co-authored a poem or been a part of a process where you've been a voice in that communal piece?
Yeah, there's a book that led up to my most recent book. Actually, it was a collaboration. 12 of the poems in the book were actually a collaborative project with a photographer. And the name of the book was called Boundaries. It's a fine press book. It's like a limited edition kind of thing. It's kind of like fine press. It's not a trade publication, but it was a great project. It was the 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 book was called Boundaries, and that was the theme. The kinds of boundaries that we were facing in our country, psychological as well as physical, boundaries of race, boundaries of sexuality, and whatnot. And it was photographs, and then I would respond to the photographs, or in some case I'd write a poem and the photographer would go out and have to find the photograph. And that was an amazing experience that actually led up to the whole theme of this new book, which deals a lot with those same kind of issues. It planted the seed of that. I participate in community more so these days by through readings, workshops, moments like this. I like what I learned today. I felt like that was community. Like, to me, wow, I never put that thought together. I learned something by engaging with all of you this morning. Lectures, readings. So I mean, imagine the last 8 years I've spent like 70% of my time traveling. So I just love that part of it. That to me has become community, to just actually not just other writers, but just readers and listeners, and them sharing their stories with you, saying that poem reminded me of this or that, makes me feel like alive, like my poem is out in the world, that it's doing things. So that's how kind of I built community at this stage of the game. Yeah.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you so much for that. And Dr. Tom Mule is asking, well, first of all, thanking you for doing this. We're all thanking you for doing this. And he says, your poetry is inspiring and meaningful. And as a poet, do you feel that certain themes tend to pop up commonly on your work? And have you ever tried to reach kind of quote unquote outside of your comfort zone for themes and explore something that's completely new? For example, he has like sci-fi or of poetry, or something totally like off the wall. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I think in the earlier years, and I think there was more exploration. But like I said this morning, I kind of landed on that big question of home that I didn't know I had, and that sort of has kind of keeps on being the focal point, the center point of my work. And so that's a great question, because I think that's something we are always negotiating as writers, and probably our students are too. What is that thing, and then do I stay in that thing, or how do I break out of that thing? It takes a long time to find that thing. um, but I would say my first book was written out of that urgency of trying to understand home, identity, cultural identity, place. And then my second book, I had a reaction to myself. I was like, oh my God, if I write about one more palm tree, or one more una goddamn puerco, I'm gonna like just lose it. And so I spent 4 years fighting against myself and writing all these other poems that were like, oh, that's going to be a Pulitzer. And meanwhile, I was writing these other poems that had nothing to do with this book, this magnificent, masterful book that I was writing. And guess what all the poems were about? home, place, identity. And so the book that I was writing was a piece of crap. And even Campbell, I gave it to Campbell. He's like, "What is this?" Like, and then I realized I had the book in my drawer. So I've learned not to fight myself, because I also feel like well, how I challenge myself is, how can a variation on the theme, right? Or how can I do, what questions haven't I asked, right, about the theme of home, place, and identity? And that keeps on growing. But I've given in. Like, sort of, if you ask me to write about a tree, before you know it, I'll be thinking like, how did the tree get here, and the seed, and where was it born? And so, but interestingly enough, this last book is kind of a bit of an experimentation, or at least it was outside of my comfort zone, and it was an outgrowth of the inauguration, because until then I had thought a poem had to be held really closely, right? Just like, that it had to be in the autobiographical sphere. That's all I kind of knew how to write. But then I realized, well, the question of home is really larger than myself. Really, it's large. It's the question we all have in America in some ways, right? It's fundamental to this young country, this democracy that's still trying to figure out who the hell that we are, right? And so I felt comfortable in that sense, because it's like, okay, I'm still talking about about the same things that concern me, just not in the same way, or I'm including other things in there. So I just feel that you can keep on growing in a theme. But it's always good to check yourself, right? Am I writing the same poem like 50 times, or after 10 books, am I still writing the same poem? How can I write still from that obsession, from that main question, but think of a new dimension for it? And that's what I'm thinking about. That's what that last book was about. This next book that I'm writing, I think, is thinking about home in a different way. Um, I'm going to be, como dicen los cubanos, voy a cumplir. I'm gonna be I'm gonna be 54, and so I'm kind of going through that whole like mortality thing, and so I'm thinking of home in another way. Like, what is that resting space? What is that final home? What is the letting go of home? What have I been clinging on to? How can I let go of that? So it's still this idea of place and identity and all this stuff, but just taking on a new dimension. But great question. I think, we spend all our life trying to find that thing that moves us, and then we also have to keep on pushing ourselves against it and with it.
Thank you so much, Richard. I love that. And yes, I was thinking of How to Love Your Country too, and I was thinking about how much I see uh, different things in that. Como tú, like you, like me, there's so much different voices, but still kind of tied by these things, undercurrent, right? This same theme. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I'm going to take one more minute to see if we have any last questions, and if not, if you could just share, whatever you're thinking, your final thoughts. And I want to thank you so very much for being with us. The book request for How to Love Your Country, How to Love a Country, I'm sorry, How to Love a Country is right on there for the book request link. And there's also a link so that you can give feedback for this session. But with that, any last questions that you want to ask, anything that you want to say or share? Richard, thank you so much again.
Yeah. Any questions? But I have one final thought that I hope we
I
can
don't
take
see
with
any.
us.
I mean, there's some questions in here, but I think you covered so much of this, and so
Yeah.
yeah, if you can
Like I
just.
was saying, don't give a Cuban a mic, right?
Oh, perfecto, todo perfecto. Thank you
No,
so much.
I just wanted to say this idea that's been presented to me lately that I think is important for us across the board as professors, no matter what discipline. The idea of cognitive diversity is really another kind of diversity that we need to pay attention to. Kids nowadays in third grade, they're asked to like declare a major. Like, I mean, I've visited classrooms where like they're like concerned, what are you going to be, like a neurosurgeon, really, in fifth grade? So I think it's so important to, as teachers, we love knowledge, right? And to realize just the idea that you can be an engineer and a poet, you can be many things in life, and they're all connected, and that part of an education is to explore all those possibilities, and I don't think that sometimes our systems don't profess that enough, the idea of cognitive diversity, and that you're allowed to chew gum and walk at the same time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I'm writing it here and I will share with everyone. And thank you so much for it. I love the idea that you were able to build a space for who you are and find and reconcile all these worlds. And again, even academically, right? The engineer and the poet. I mean, how powerful is that? So thank you so much for being with us
Thank you.
today. Thank you so much for all your thoughts, all your wonderful advice and recommendations, and for your words. Your journey. So
Sure.
te extraño. Thank you, Richard. And everyone, you can leave some comments for Richard Blanco on our lip guide. The link is there. And muchos saludos, muchos abrazos, and bye.
Igualmente.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.